Hello everyone and welcome to Cook With Me Live tonight. I'm so excited that I finally get to be doing a delicious dessert, in this case a trifle with you. So while everyone's logging in, just give me a little hello, let me know who's in the kitchen with you, same sort of things. I want to know where you're cooking from tonight or today. And if you're just watching along, then that's absolutely okay, because tonight's going to be a pretty awesome, intense one. In the sense of, I'll explain that a little bit, is when we make the trifle in the sort of healthier way, we're not going to be cheating and using any of the processed versions of trifle. So for those of you where I guess trifle might not necessarily conjure up the most decadent dessert, for some people I've heard it's seen as kind of the pauper's dessert or kind of the throw together scrap dessert, which I think initially is how it came about. But this version of trifle, I promise you, I've gone to great lengths to make sure that we can make it the healthiest version while still passing as a delicious, yummy dessert. So in order to achieve that, I've made it obviously gluten-free. We've gone dairy-free and fully vegan in this case. So one of my biggest challenges was to get a sponge, a cake, to work while using whole food ingredients. And I promise you that was a bit of a challenge. But as a result, this cake that we've ended up with is now something that you can use at any child's birthday party, especially if there's allergy conscious desire to do something good by most kids, as well as cupcakes. You can turn it into biscotti. You could have it as any other form of base cake that you'd need. This recipe can work. And this is kind of the vanilla white cake version. So I'm sure we can develop, and I will develop other flavors as we go along, but this is the base recipe. So we're going to be doing the sponge as well as then preparing the other elements of the trifle from scratch. So we're going to do a jelly, we're going to do a custard, and then we're going to be decorating the final dessert. So although you might not have your dessert to eat tonight because things will need to set and finish cooling, I've now prepared some in advance so that I can show you the final steps right through to the end and make you a bit jealous when I dig into it at the end. Okay, so there are a few little steps involved, a few little bits of equipment we're going to need. This is not an everyday dessert, I will fully admit that. This is the second recipe in my 4-part series leading up to Christmas Day, so that you have all the training and the practice so that you can even make this entire meal before Christmas Day and you don't actually end up in the kitchen on Christmas Day. That was my plan. So this recipe could be your dessert. I hope it can be. I hope you love it enough. And this time you'll get to try it so that you know what you want to do for Christmas. And then you could even tweak and change a couple of things for Christmas Day if you want different fruit or a different flavor, different little styles. I'll give you a few options as we go along tonight. All right, how's everyone going? Logging in. Hello, Shirley, welcome. Hello, Monique. Thank you for being online on time. I am going to jump straight in because, like I said, there are a few moving parts to tonight, and there's so much that I want to show you and teach you about the general, I guess you could say, principles behind, in this case, a vegan gluten-free cake, and also the trifle, so the jellies from scratch. We're also not using gelatin. We're going to be using agar-agar, which is a seaweed-based jelly, gelatinizing substance, if you will. So in that sense, there are a few little intricacies that I want to bring across to you to make this a bit of an easier task. And hopefully have you a little bit of fun along the way. Okay, so we're going to get started. We're going to start with the sponge. So if you haven't already got all your ingredients for the sponge out, you can start piling them in front of you now. One of those key pieces of equipment you're going to need is a mix master, or if you've got a Thermomix, you're going to need the butterfly wand. And if you're not using that equipment, you'll need one of these guys because we're going to have to whisk up the aquafaba, which is the liquid from a chickpea tin. I know it seems strange, just trust me on this. Okay, and we're going to be whisking that up into a meringue so that that can form the fluffiness of our cake if we're not using eggs, all right? In the event that you are not strictly vegan, you could, in this case, use eggs instead, but I would like you, for the sake of your learning purposes, to learn a different way to do it, just in case you want to have that option, or maybe one day you're out of eggs and you have a tin of chickpeas in the pantry. Okay, so it's a different option, and yeah, I basically can't wait to show you how it goes, okay? So once you've got all your ingredients out for the cake, like I said before, we're going to start with the aquafaba. We're going to make a meringue out of that. Okay, so into your mix master, we're going to get that ready, and your tin of chickpeas. You can do this from home-cooked chickpeas. The trick is to get the right consistency of the liquid that it cooks in. So we kind of need to simmer it down for a fair while till we get that kind of thicker, more viscous liquid out of it. All right. So we're going to use all the liquid from that tin. You should get about half a cup out of that. And one of the easiest ways I find to do that is I'm going to get my little strainer here and just tip it all in and stop the chickpeas from going in. Okay. And then obviously save the chickpeas. You can make a batch of hummus tomorrow. You could saute them up for breakfast. You could put them in the oven and make roasted, dried out chickpeas with a bit of salt on them. They're a delicious snack. So definitely don't throw out the chickpeas, and we want all of that liquid. There we go. Okay. So we'll put that aside for now. And then you're going to need just a touch of acidity to get this to do the meringue thing. So you can use just a couple drops of apple cider vinegar. Probably about 1/4 teaspoon is what we're after. And that's just that little bit of acidity to make sure that we're going to get this blending happening. Okay, first little bit of magic, straight into it. Hope everyone's with me. Whatever machine you're using, we're going to have to whisk it, blend it up until we get that thick, frothy meringue happening, okay? So in this case, it's probably going to be about 45 seconds on speed 4.5, roughly. Maybe just 4. Either or, okay? And if you're doing it by hand, it may take a minute or two just to get that froth to start happening. Okay, so that's making our meringue. In order to stabilize that meringue so it doesn't just fall flat again, we're going to need some xanthan gum. You could also get away with using guar gum. Guar gum is another alternative, but xanthan gum is probably our best bet. When you buy xanthan gum, try to find the non-GMO xanthan gum, all right? Okay, so you won't be able to see this just yet. Just give me 1 second and then I'll show you what we're working with here. All right, so that was just under a minute. Okay, and I'll just let you see what we've got already. So we're starting to get the beginnings of the meringue, okay, and that's exactly what we want. So see how we turned chickpea liquid into like this frothy white foam, basically, okay? Now, if we were to just leave that sit, it would flatten back down again into liquid, okay? So what we are going to need is that little tiny bit of gum just to keep that depth and that fluffiness so that when we mix it through the cake, we do actually get the air bubbles as opposed to everything flattening down. It's kind of a delicate substance. So I'm going to turn that back on, and as I'm mixing, I'm going to put in very slowly my xanthan gum. And in this case, I've called for just 1/4 teaspoon. So let's make sure that's kind of leveled off. So we've got 1/4 teaspoon of xanthan gum, and I'm going to sprinkle it in slowly while it's mixing. Kind of important, that step, so make sure you can have your machine mixing as well. And we'll continue to mix, and you might hear it thicken. You might hear it actually stabilize and thicken up even more. That's exactly what we want. Okay, so that's done. So now we are going to be, well, depending what machine you're using, we're going to need a food processor or a blender of some kind to mix up all the wet ingredients next. So if you're using the same machine, we're going to transfer that out into a separate bowl, and we're going to use it at the end. So grab your trusty spatula so you have less waste. All right, and we'll transfer that into a little bowl. Now, to make sure that you've done this correctly, you can do the upside down bowl test, which looks like this. And nothing comes out, okay? Because we want that to be really stable and thick. So we're gonna have to take that one out by hand, twist off the butterfly here. Come on. There we go. Okay, and we're going to scrape that down. Now, if for some reason this didn't work for you, either we didn't beat long enough, or possibly your bowl wasn't clean and dry enough, okay? And in all fairness, I did forget to mention that before I started, but with any case of in any meringue, whether you're using eggs or not, the bowl must be very clean and dry for that to happen. Okay, so as a matter of fact, I'm not even getting as thick of a meringue as I normally do, and I think that's because I kind of cheated a little bit. I did the flax meal before I started, and I dry wiped the bowl, but I didn't actually maybe fully do that. So this is not as thick as it should be, but it's still going to hold for us, so that's all right. This should be really quite sticky and thick and very voluminous, if you will. Okay, how's everyone going so far? Who's actually cooking along with me at the same time here tonight? Some of you might just be watching, I realize that, but who's actually doing this with me at the same time? I want to hear how that's going for you. We don't want to waste a single bit of fluffy, airy bit of the cake. There we go. Okay, so if your mixing machine for the wet ingredients and or the dry ingredients is the same bowl, we don't need to bother washing it out just yet. As long as you've done a good job with a spatula, then we can do the rest without taking that extra step to clean it. So we'll put this aside for now. Okay. And then in terms of efficiency and or dishes, which I'm a big fan of, the next step we could do is the dry ingredients. Okay, so if we mix the dry ingredients first in here, then that'll take the effort out of us doing it by hand. Then we can pour that into a bowl and mix up the wet ingredients after. Okay, but if you are just using a bowl for this, let's do the dry ingredients next. Ideally, if you've got a set of kitchen scales, let's use those, because whenever we're doing baked goods that involve flour, it's much better off if you can measure by weight as opposed to by volume, because the volume measurements are generally never as accurate as they aren't ever as accurate as going by weight. So if you do have kitchen scales, it is worth your while, especially if this is your first time making the cake, to get it right. All right? Okay, so as far as the dry ingredients go, let's switch over to that now. So we're going to put 300 grams of either sorghum or rice flour into the mixer. Okay, and let's just do the weight calc there. And if you haven't got enough, you could also substitute a little bit of buckwheat flour. You probably wouldn't want to go the whole amount of buckwheat flour because that'll get a bit too wet. Okay, so we're going to aim for 300 grams here. There we go. Okay. So that's 300 grams of sorghum flour. That is gluten-free. And then next up, we want to do the potato starch or the tapioca. And we're going to go 200 grams of that, or about a cup and a half. If you haven't got enough of one, hopefully in your pantry, you conveniently have stocked the other. So I'm just going to do a combination here in case I don't have. Oh, I forgot to turn my scales on. Okay, interesting. So if that happens, you could try and scoop it out to measure it, or you could go by feel if you feel confident. Okay, or knowing how much that you just put put your scales on and measure roughly what you just put in that measurement. See how much that weighed. So maybe I say I put in about 70 grams. I'm going to double that, right? Because I put it in first by accident and then I put it in now. So I'm at 140 grams. So I want another 60 grams to this. Okay. 140 grams, yep, that equals 200. So I want another 60 grams. So I want to bring this up to 120. So a little bit of math if you happen to forget that extra little step. Okay, good. I'm only over by about 20 grams. And this is the type of thing that's nice to go by weight. So knowing that I'm 20 grams over means I might just add that little extra pinch of coconut cream. So I balance out the dry with the wet. Otherwise, I could end up with a slightly drier cake. It does happen, okay? But it's absolutely okay. It's not the end of the world. Okay, so that's our flours. Then we want to go 3/4 of a cup of flax meal, okay, which is about 80 grams. Let's make sure we tear that this time. And if you want a very white cake, I would recommend using the golden flax meal. And the whiter you want it, the thing that makes this cake darker is the coconut sugar. So as much as I do not recommend you use regular sugar, as in cane sugar, white sugar, even raw sugar, if you absolutely, like if this is your first time making it and you really need to sell some really picky kids on the idea of this cake, healthy cake, maybe don't use the healthy word, then you might want to use some organic raw sugar just to make it a little bit more whiter in color until you can kind of gain the trust, and then you can start putting, you know, half of the amount of white sugar, half the amount of coconut sugar, and eventually it becomes a brown cake, but they know they love it and it doesn't matter. Okay, so that's a strategy we can implement. So about 80 grams of our flax meal, approximately. Okay, and 3 teaspoons of baking powder. Now, baking powder is different to baking soda. Baking soda is another name for bicarb soda. Okay, so it's a bit confusing. So bicarb soda and baking soda are the same thing. Think the sodas. Baking powder is different. So we want 3 level teaspoons of baking soda. I like to use the back of a knife to give me the most accurate measure there, unless we get chunks. Okay, so 3 level teaspoons of that. And then about half a teaspoon of salt. Again, not to make the cake taste salty, but it's just to bring out that extra flavor from what we do add. So half a teaspoon of that. All right, that's our dry ingredients. So let's blend those up, save us a step of hand mixing. Just give them a quick little whisk. That should be good. And then we'll transfer that into a mixing bowl. So in this case, again, using one of my big favorite bowls, I would recommend it because we want to do some really light and airy tossing in of the meringue, of the aquafaba meringue. So give yourself a nice big bowl to work with. It's going to be frustrating if you're in too small of a bowl. Okay, so we'll put the dry ingredients in there and we'll give that another scrape down with our spatula. Not super critical at this step. Okay, there we go. And then we're going to need that again for our wet ingredients. So we'll just put the dry mix aside and then we'll get into the wet. Okay, so last step here with the wet ingredients. 4 large apples. Now you might be going, oh my goodness, why am I putting 4 apples in a cake? Well, the first reason, excuse me, is so that you don't have to be adding extra sugar. Cakes, until you've made a few of them, you might be surprised at how much sugar is actually required to get that flavor that you love, especially if you buy your cakes at restaurants or cafes or out. So in order to achieve that level of sweetness, you would probably be very surprised to see how much sugar has to go into it. So in some cases, we can use fruit instead of as much sugar. And in this case, that's adding fiber, it's adding flavor as well, a nice flavor to it. It's adding a bit of sweetness, and it's also actually acting as a texture, a positive texture for this cake. So it's a little bit of a secret in vegan baking is to use applesauce. We're going to skip the processing step of using applesauce from a jar and just use fresh apples with the assistance of our food processor or blender. Okay, so about 4 large apples. Again, ideally if you can weigh that, that would be the most accurate so that you know what you've got. So we want about 450 grams of apple. There we go, 450. So you get a bonus, you get a little treat later, or you can stick it in the trifle. Okay, so that's our apple. Then we're going to need about 80 grams worth of a neutral oil. So let's tare that. Ideally, you know, a macadamia oil, cold pressed, or even a natural sesame oil, not a toasted sesame oil, don't make that mistake. I'm going to use some organic cold pressed sunflower oil because that's what I have on hand. About 80 grams. There we go. Okay, and excuse me, some vanilla extract. Now, a little interesting tidbit. If you happen to be out of vanilla, but you have a well-stocked pantry, maybe, just maybe, you happen to go on a trip to Canada and find your way into this amazing little spice store and walk out with some things called tonka beans. So, and those of you that are in Canada, I highly recommend you go and visit the Silk Road. They are amazing, and I had a bit of a heyday in there for a couple of hours. and came away with these slightly expensive things called tonka beans. And I wish you could smell them on camera right now, but basically they're very vanilla-like. So I'm going to use those instead of vanilla today because I'm actually all out of vanilla and I actually want to do this instead. So they're quite simple. They're kind of like nutmeg. You just grate your grater or your little hand microplane, and we're just going to grate them in, watching your fingers. So pretty much exactly like nutmeg in process. And that little stubby bit at the end we can maybe use a knife for. Okay, so 2 tonka beans, or in your case, maybe a bit easier to pour your vanilla in now. About 2 to 3 teaspoons. If you really love vanilla flavor, go 3. If not, you can stick to the 2 teaspoons. And I have yet to find out where we can get tonka beans in Australia, but if anyone knows, let me know. Okay, and those little bits I'm just gonna chop up and put them in as well. Such an interesting smell. It's very, very cool. Tonka beans. Okay, that's our vanilla. So next up is the coconut cream. 300 grams of coconut cream. Now I've worked out this recipe so that you can use 2 400-gram tins of coconut cream. Most of it's going to go into the coconut custard, but we want 300 grams of it for this cake. And we're probably at the right stage now where we can turn the oven on. So let's get that warmed up. So about 180 degrees Celsius, which is the equivalent of about 350, I believe, Fahrenheit. Yes, 350 degrees Fahrenheit. So let's get that ready to go. Just on regular bake mode. Okay. And then we'll continue with this one. So 300 grams of your coconut cream, which will be most of the tin, 3/4 of that tin. There we go. And save the rest for your custard afterwards. All right, and then the sugar. So your choice, if you want to do, like I said, the white sugar, if this is your first time convincing people. Otherwise, the coconut sugar. Keeping in mind that a raw cane sugar is going to be sweeter than coconut sugar. So if you don't want to go too sweet, probably just go 1 cup of the organic raw sugar. Or in this case with the coconut sugar, we want to go about 1.25 cups to get 1.25 cups. I've said 1 cup. Oh, yes, I've said 1.25 cups. Thank you. Just checking. Make sure I don't mislead you. Okay. Or we can go by weight on that one as well. So that's 1/2 cup. Okay. And just for reference, this is a bit of a big cake, but most cakes without the apple and most cakes that are calling for it to be really sweet, you'd be adding at least 2 cups of sugar to this to achieve that. So it feels like a lot when you see that many going. I don't know, maybe not for you, but for me it just feels like whoa. Okay, so you can obviously reduce that according to your palate, and you can customize that without affecting the recipe too much. Okay, that's all of our wet ingredients. Let's blend the bejeebies out of that as smooth as you can get it. Crank it up, let it go, and as smooth as we can get it. Okay, that should be good. Make sure that's nice and smooth. And again, like we did skins and all, guys, so you're going to be getting still, even though this is in some cases a birthday cake or a very special dessert, we are still getting all the benefit of that fiber from the apples, from the flax meal, definitely we're getting good quality flours. Okay, so the higher quality you can purchase, I always recommend that. Ideally organic sorghum flour and organic flax meal and those things that you can get. Best quality that you can. A lot less guilt then when you have cake. Okay, so there's our wet ingredients. Now, before we do that combining step, I just want to take you through the container that you'll be cooking it in, okay? So a couple of tricks here. Just let me get myself set up so you can watch this. Depending on what trifle container you're making, there's a lot of different ways to present your trifle. What I'm going to be recommending is, for saving you time and energy, and I think also making a prettier result, I'm going to be using this container as my trifle container. Okay, so it's just a stand with a glass base. And the goal, regardless of what container you choose for your trifle, ideally it's see-through, but the goal is that you also have a baking dish that matches that. Okay, and ideally it doesn't fit in it, because then that means when the cake finishes baking, it'll be a nice snug fit, so that we'll see the cake around the edges rather than anything dripping down it. Okay, so just a bit of an aesthetic thing. It's not the end of the world. This one is going to be just a little bit too small because it fits in there. So ideally we want it just barely to not fit, and that would be the perfect, I guess, size match. Okay, so that's what I'm going to use to make the cake for this size trifle. So in order to prepare that, this is an aluminium pan, which I'm not a fan of. So what I'm going to do is at least put a protection in place in between the aluminium foil. Ideally, we wouldn't use it at all, but if that's all that you can get or find, and that's just the way it is, this is your next best step. Okay, so instead of sitting there and tracing around all the edges, we want to leave ourselves enough room on the edges so it can come up the sides. So I'm going to cut it square. Okay, and then instead of sitting there, like I said, and cutting everything to shape, I want you to cut into the corners up to the edge of the container. Okay, so we're going to cut into the corners. And because this is a large dish, we may have to put one cut in the middle as well. So just up to the edges of the container. Then, when you go to put it in, these should fold into each other quite nicely. Okay, there we go. So then you don't have the crinkled edges happening when we pour the cake in, which will show when it bakes. Okay, so this is what we want. We want it to sit kind of nice and flush, and then when we pour the cake batter into here, it'll hold all the sides up. You could also trim them if you wanted, but that's exactly what we want. Okay, so hopefully that's a little trick that saves you. Next little thing I just want to show you is if you're using a springform pan, so the ones that expand, take it out, take it apart. And again, this is a non-stick surface. We don't want to have our food touching that if all possible. So I'd like to cut another square that's a little bit bigger than the size of your round. Okay, so in this case, I'm just going to chop that off there. And then with it over top, just put the frame around it, push down, and close. So then you can just tuck in the edges, and you don't have to worry about spilling anything or getting anything everywhere. That takes care of that. And then around the sides, we'll just take this extra little bit, cut it in half, and put it around the sides. And if it doesn't want to stay, just put a little bit of water on the edges. Hopefully it would fit perfectly around the whole thing, but in this case, we'd call that good, okay? So that's how you can protect it without getting those crinkled corners. I hope you know what I mean. When you just bunch it all in there, it doesn't look pretty when we finish the bake. So that's how you do it if it was a springform pan, okay? All right, so now we can combine our cake. Let's mix wet into dry first, or dry into wet, whichever you want to do. Okay. Don't waste a drop of that. There we go. and we'll give that a good mix. So there's no huge rush here. In some of my recipes, I know I say to do that. It depends on what we're using for ingredients. In this case, it's not a big deal. We're using baking powder instead of baking soda, so it's not going to be as reactive. So we want to make sure we get all that flour absorbed. So this is why I like to mix using a spatula, because you can get down the bottom and you don't end up with flour surprises when you pour the cake out. Okay, so we're getting rid of those. And then we're going to fold in the meringue. So by fold, this is what I mean. So we put it on top. And folding is kind of like doing vertical circles. So we're just going to lift with our flat spatula and do vertical circles as we spin the bowl. So we're not like getting in there and whipping it around. We're folding it in just to keep those bubbles nice and light. So here, if we can act a little bit quicker, you can see we're starting to get air happen in the mix. That's what we want, but we want it to happen while it's in the tin. Okay, so please behave yourselves, paper. Otherwise I'll have to cut it. There we go. And we'll just let the cake kind of hold the edges up, ideally. Scraping all that in. There we go. Okay. So that is maybe, I'm curious to know, is that your very first vegan sponge cake? This probably took me a good 10 or 12 oopsie cakes before I got to this stage. I started this months ago, believe it or not. So now hopefully you can benefit from all of that work without having to do that yourself. All right, so we're just going to kind of smooth out the edges a little bit just so we get that nice flat top. It's going to rise a bit in the middle, so we almost want to push the cake out to the edges a bit more than usual. Have a little bit of a bowl, just a little bit, just very subtle, because it is going to rise more in the middle than the edges. And there we go. Okay, how are we going? Hello, Narelle, welcome. You want this recipe, Healthy Trifle? Well, you can definitely have it, Narelle. You just have to go on to cookwithme.live, and then you can sign up for getting all the recipes by email every single week. It's free. So jump on cookwithme.live. You can even then download this recipe right now because it's on that page. Should be on that page. and go from there. So yeah, you can have trifle for Christmas. Okay, so if we want to tidy this up for the sake of our own pedanticness, you can just trim up the edges. It'll also prevent any accidental burning in the oven. And then we're ready to put it in the oven. Okay, so if you're doing one big cake, let's aim for 40 minutes. If you've done two separate smaller cakes, still go about 35 minutes or so. It's only if you're doing cupcakes that you'd reduce it down to maybe 27, 28 minutes. Getting very approximate there. So straight into the oven. Try not to shake it around too much. And we're going to set the timer. Do not want to forget about that. But one of the main ways that you can know whether cooking is done is when you really start to smell it. So it's kind of a good habit to get into, is to kind of be aware when you really smell what you're cooking. It's generally a sign that it's done and ready to go. Okay, so that's the cake, that's the sponge bit, and again, that alone as a recipe could become a staple for you. Like I said, birthday cakes, cupcakes, you name it. As far as a healthy recipe goes for doing with the kids, I know there's a few moving parts, but honestly, the benefits that you're going to get out of that in terms of nutrition and having, I don't know if guilt's the right word, but you know, feeling better about having these treats, then definitely learning how to make that really quick and easy is, I think, one of the best steps. Okay, so that's the sponge cake. Let's move on to the jelly. We're not going to be using Jell-O packets. We're not going to be using airplane jelly packets. We're going to be doing it from scratch with agar-agar. So at this stage, you will need a saucepan, okay? And we're going to need to get out initially your coconut water, lemon juice, and the agar-agar powder. Now, hopefully you were able to find the powder as opposed to the flakes. The flakes behave a little bit differently and we need much more of them. They take a lot longer to dissolve. So the powder is kind of the way to go. And if you haven't got it, then the flakes, like I said, just let it dissolve a lot longer, maybe 15-20 minutes in the slightly warm liquid first. We're going to aim for the powder. Okay, come on back with me and let's get the jelly and the custard happening. All right, so fairly straightforward. Let's turn the heat on there. Yes, let's do that. Let's turn the heat on to about medium. Okay, so maybe 6 and for you. And we're going to be adding half or just under half your coconut water. You don't really need to measure it. You can just go by feel. So if we're using 4 cups, this is 1 liter, we only want about 2 cups in there or a bit less. Okay, then our 2 lemons, or 1.5 I've called for. Depends on how lemony you like things. Okay, this is going to be like a coconut lemon jelly. And other variations that you could do for this would be just using fruit juice instead of coconut water. So if you have a favorite fruit juice, you will probably have to cook, unfortunately, cook the fruit juice, all of it in this case. Otherwise, sometimes the jelly won't set, depending on how acidic that fruit juice is, which is why we're cooking the lemon juice as well. Okay, so we want to get, whoa, no more of that one. Full 2 lemon juice out of this. And if you have a sweet tooth and you really want a sweet jelly, you're probably going to be needing to add a bit of sugar to this. Because my goal with this jelly is that it's mostly see-through, you are going to have to use a white sugar if you want that. I really don't think it needs it, and I'd rather you not eat the sugar, but if you want to add more sweet, I'd rather you add it maybe elsewhere to leave a bit of contrast in the dish, because if every single part of the dish is equally sweet, then it actually loses a lot of enjoyment when you bite into it, believe it or not. So we kind of want that contrast. So in this jelly, we're going for kind of that more lemony flavor in the jelly. We're going to go for sweetness in the cake and the custard. And then we're going to go for like a nice mellow, refreshing topping, which is going to be the coconut yogurt and the fruit on top. Okay, so there's our lemon juice. And into that, we want to be putting the agar-agar powder. So it's just a very fine powder, nothing too special there. And this comes from seaweed. So it is a natural ingredient. All right, now you have a couple of options at this point. Depending on how firm you like your jelly, everyone's different. Given that we're going to be putting the jelly down the bottom layer, I've found that it can sometimes collapse when you cut through it, when you go to serve it. And if it's served not perfectly cold, it can sometimes get a bit soft for people's liking. So the amount of agar-agar that I've added there, the 1¼ teaspoon, you may want to up that a little bit if you like a slightly firmer jelly. Okay, so, and this one you want to measure very properly, sorry. So we definitely want level teaspoons, okay? So that's 1 teaspoon. And you could go 1½ to get the slightly firmer jelly. You could go as much as 1¾ but I wouldn't go any more than that. Okay, so that's 1½ teaspoons as opposed to the 1¼ that I called for before. Unless you like a nice delicate jelly. Okay, so we'll give that a little whisk. And then we're just going to let that sit and dissolve on medium heat. We don't want it to go too fast. So if you are cooking with gas, you might want to go medium-low, maybe 4, gas setting 4. Okay, and we're going to leave that and come back to that in a second to continue that. But in the meantime, let's get the container that we're going to be pouring that into ready. So we're going to need our trifle container and then our fruit, most of our fruit. So a couple little tricks to show you there. Some of you will have seen this already. Now, You can use any form of fruit for this. Obviously, that's completely up to you, your choice of things. Berries look really nice. I probably wouldn't do bananas because they're going to go a little bit brown, but you could do definitely any of your stone fruit. You could do apricots, plums, nectarines, peaches, mangoes. You could do apple. Probably want to go more the softer fruits for this, and then your berries. So I'm going to use mango because it's mango season. I'm very excited by that. And I'll show you a couple of tricks. So let's take off the cheeks of the mango, getting it as close as we can to the pit. So we want to follow the edge of that pit. Oh, that was not a very good one. Let's see how this side is. Okay, so I won't use that one. Let's start with our smaller ones first, and then I'll go grab another one if I need to. All right, and you might find that a serrated knife is actually easier to use. There we go. There's a good one. Okay, so we want to take the cheeks off the side of the mango. This center bit is not necessarily going to be the greatest for show, so you could eat this bit, or you could save it if you're going to be putting a pile of fruit on the top after. You could save this bit for that. So we want to take that off, the seed. Okay, and then many of you will have seen me do this already, but the cup trick with the mango cheeks. So find yourself a cup. It can be a glass cup, but we want to have one that has edges that are a little bit sharper than fatter, for example. And we want to be able to just scoop it into the edge of that mango and scoop out the flesh from the cheek. So you're leaving pretty much no waste whatsoever on that cheek skin, which is my favorite, no waste. Okay, and we're just going to lay them flat and cut them after. So we take out the cheeks. This one trick alone has facilitated the idea of buying a whole case of mangoes when they're ready and abundant and freezing them so that we have them all through the winter. But if without that trick, it was just way too much work. So there we go. You'll get pretty fast at this. Okay, so peeling whichever fruit that you've got. If you're using peaches, I would probably recommend taking the skins off. So the easy way to do that is to boil the jug, boil the kettle, and get a little bowl for the hot water, the boiling water, and put the peaches in for no more than about 30 seconds or so. Okay, and then you take them out and the peels should come off very easily. If you need to go a little bit longer, you can, but you don't really want to cook the peaches. Okay, so that's the easiest way to peel them. And then depending on how you want to serve the presentation of this dish, with peaches and nectarines and plums and apricots, in order to get them to look pretty, it's probably nicer if we just kind of toss everything together nicely diced and put it on as a pile on top of the cake. So in that case, you may want to toss them in a little bit of coconut sugar or other sugar if they're not super sweet, just to give it that nice kind of even browned look, and then it won't make such a big difference if they go a little bit brown as a result of being exposed to the oxygen. So you can kind of cheat that a little bit by adding just a little bit of coconut sugar and tossing it through. You don't need to do that with mango though. Okay, so I'm just doing some little strips of mango, and then I'm going to arrange the middle bits of the mango, because they're the biggest ones, in my dish. So you can do this however you wish. Probably try to keep the skinny side, the point side, to the middle. Okay. And again, depending on the size of the dish you chose, your arrangement might change. Okay. And really, this is not super critical that the bottom of the dish is pretty. It's only if you're going to lift this dish up and show everyone your pattern that you did at the bottom. Otherwise, you could just cut the fruit and put it in randomly and then put your jelly on top. So it doesn't have to be a perfect little shape here. Okay, but for the sake of decoration, and because I think food tastes better when you know you've put love into it, I'm going to do it that way. And then I'm going to put some frozen blueberries through that so that we get a bit of contrasting colors, and I'll show you the effect after it's done. Okay, so I'm just going to sprinkle some blueberries through there. And you could definitely fill this up with more fruit. So you could go much more mango, much more nectarine, whichever you're using. You could make that fully full on the bottom layer. So that's entirely up to you. Okay. And then that's ready to pour our jelly on top of. We're going to use this to decorate the top. Okay, so come on back. Let's finish the jelly. How is everyone going? I should check on you guys. Okay. All right. So we're just going to bring this up now to a boil. Now that we're ready to work with it, let's just crank the heat up and whisk away. So because it's the agar-agar, we do need it to reach a boil. Okay, so it's not enough to just get it dissolved. It does need to boil for about 30 seconds at least in order to activate that. Okay, so we do want it to bring it to a boil. While that's happening, we could be getting the rest of the ingredients ready for the coconut custard. Okay, so let's prepare that. You could just grab another saucepan if you're not worried about dishes. We don't have to do it in the same one. And then we'll get everything ready so it's a bit faster, I guess, in speeding it up. So let's put the remainder of our coconut cream into here for the coconut custard, if you're ready to get onto that step with me. So it should be the rest of the 2 tins in total. Okay. And I'm using my fancy little spoon. Best kitchen tool ever. Got to get one of these things. It's called a spoon, and it's an invention by Dream Farm. And my goodness, I love it. I use it all the time. It's just like a little mini spatula spoon. So our coconut cream into the pot. If your mixture is already boiling, then give it a good whisk, a really good whisk, and we want to boil it for at least, I said, about 30 seconds. It can go longer. It can definitely go longer. That's all right. I'm curious to know who has a trifle tradition already for their Christmas day. Because for me, it wasn't a huge thing in Canada, but maybe that's because my mom was such a good baker that we always had so many other different types of desserts. But yeah, I'd be curious to know. There's a bazillion different ways you can present a trifle, and all the different ways you can flavor it up, creating different variations every time you do it. My next one's going to be like a chocolate mocha trifle, something like that, just as a heads up. Okay, how are we all going? All right, so we are nearly at the boil for this one. And as that happens, I'm just going to continue building the coconut custard over here. So for this one, I've said about 1 1/4 teaspoon as well for the agar-agar powder. With the custard, you don't want it to be too gelatinous, so let's stick to that 1 1/4. Nicely measured. So nice level teaspoons. That's going to go in there. And that's all we're going to put in that pot for now. So see how we've got the boil happening? That's great. Let's just keep it whisked just to dissolve any last little bits of agar-agar that might be down the bottom. And you can make your own any flavored jelly that you want like this too. So even if you want to put it into molds, the only thing I'll say is this is a bit of a softer jelly that I've got the recipe for here. So if you want it to come out of a mold, you'll need to put in more of the agar-agar. All right, question from Chris. Trifle is sacred at Christmas for us. Awesome. No other time of the year, and my sister is the master cook there. I think this will surprise her this year with this recipe. Cool, that's awesome, Chris. I'm glad to hear that. Trifle master. Ooh, I can't wait. Hear how it goes. Okay, that's boiled long enough. So let's just trade. And with that heat, we'll start this one happening. Okay. And then the reason why so that's just got the coconut cream and the agar-agar powder, and we just want to slowly dissolve that. Okay. So the reason why I've kept aside half of the coconut water is so that we don't cook the fruit when we pour it over. So now we're going to pour in the rest of the coconut water to cool that off a bit. Okay. There we go. And we'll give that another stir. I'm just going to get this guy out of the way here. Okay, now the one little trick is we don't want to disturb our design, so we have to pour it in very slowly. So ideally you're not dropping it from a high distance. And if you have the choice, you might want to do this step really close to the fridge where you're going to be setting this after, because otherwise it might shift around a bit. So we want to pour it in really slowly, just so we don't mess up our design and float all the fruit. But it's not the end of the world if you do, because it's going to be on the bottom of your dish. Oh, if I had more time, this is where I love being in the kitchen. This is where the creativity, I think, really can come out. There's no point in going to this much effort for someone that's going to just devour the dish in, you know, probably literally under 3 minutes by the time they get the slice on their plate. There's no point in, I think, going to that much effort if you don't enjoy it and you can't have fun with it yourself. So let this be your art. Let it be something that heals your soul, knowing that you're providing healthier food and you've put in that extra little bit of effort for your loved ones. At least that's how I look at it. Okay, so nice generous bit of jelly down the bottom. Last little bit. There we go. Okay, so now you need to very carefully carry that to the fridge. Because I'm not going to do that right now and I've already got one made, I'm just going to put it to the side and trust that you know how to do that very carefully to your fridge. Okay, so that's that step. Let's finish the coconut custard and then we can assemble it and I'll show you how it all comes together. So like I said, a few moving parts, but the cool thing about this recipe is that each of these moving parts can be made separately for their own uses. So definitely keeping in mind that now you have a custard recipe that's dairy-free. Now you have a jelly recipe that's not full of colors and numbers and preservatives, and it's also vegan, if that's important to you, plant-based, okay? And also with the cake. So now you have another option for any of your friends that require a little bit more care and attention. You want to give them. Let's crank up the heat on this one now. We want to bring that to a boil. And while that's happening, we can make use of our tin here, our empty tin, and we're going to need half a cup of water with our tapioca starch. Okay, and the tapioca starch is what's going to give us our nice creamy texture for our custard. So once you've got your tapioca starch there, you're going to need 3 tablespoons. So let's look to make that as accurate as we can. 3 tablespoons into the room temperature water or colder. So if we were to put that into hot water, it would glug up on us immediately. So we definitely want to dissolve it first in this. So 3 level tablespoons of tapioca starch. Give that a good stir, mix it all up. And then while we're doing that, we can also measure out our sweeteners. Now, I was actually out of honey, and if you also wanted to make it a fully vegan dish by definition, we wouldn't be using the honey, we'd be using the rice bran syrup or extra maple syrup. And I'd rather you use rice malt syrup over something like agave. All right, so just give that a little stir. So let's measure our sweeteners. We want about half a cup in total. Okay, so however you make that up is up to you. And use a little bit of rice bran syrup, but keeping in mind that rice bran syrup is actually not that sweet compared to maple syrup or honey. So if you really do want that extra sweetness, you might need to add a touch more of that one. Okay, and then I'm going to use some real maple syrup. I already got up to my half a cup. Just did a touch of that then. Okay, so ideally about 1/4 cup of each. And then we want our vanilla. So if you are going to, this one does need, I guess, proper vanilla, if you will. If you only have vanilla powder, then you will see the flecks. So that's entirely up to you. I'm going to add, found this little bit of extract. I'm going to add my vanilla there. Okay. And that's that. And now we just have to combine it in the right order. So we're nearly at the boil. I got sticky fingers. I don't know about you. Nice having the sink of already run hot water. How's everyone going? Who is cooking with me tonight, or who's just watching? I feel like some of you guys are just observing first. I totally understand. That's all right. But then hopefully by the end of this, you'll see that it's really not that hard. There's just a few moving parts, and once you're comfortable with it, it all comes together quite easily. All right, so we're nearly at the boil with that one. We do need to wait for that. Maybe you can check on your cake. Don't open the oven though, just have a look, see how it's cooking. Okay, I don't know if you can see into there, but we do have a nice rise happening. It's a beautiful, even color. Oh, looks so good. Okay, and on that note, a cake without eggs is a little bit more delicate, and it's going to be slightly denser just by nature. Plus also we are using really high, awesome amounts of fiber. So by nature, it's not gonna be an angel cake, but that's okay. It still tastes delicious. So keeping in mind when you take it out of the oven, don't take it out and slam it down. Just kind of be gentle with it. And once it's fully cool, then it's completely stable and completely set. But until that, we don't kind of want to disturb it too much if possible. All right, so we want to wait for this to boil. It is just starting to do that now, and we do want to kind of give it about that 30 seconds on the boil because of the agar-agar. So we're nearly there. And then we're going to need to transfer this into a container to cool in the fridge. Okay, so you just might want to get a bowl ready, a little bowl for that, to transfer that into. Okay, so once we've got that boil happening, and now we do, we've got that simmering, and it's been about 30 seconds since I saw those bubbles. Then we're going to add in very slowly while whisking the tapioca. It's actually not important that you go slowly. It's more that we add it in at this stage. Okay, so the tapioca is going to thicken it pretty instantaneously. And if we go too long with the tapioca, it will flatten out again. So at this step, we're just going to drizzle that in. You can almost see it happen immediately. See how it's starting to thicken up just under my fingertips there already. Yeah, look at that. Okay. So we just want to take it a little bit further under a little bit more heat so that we fully cook that tapioca. Otherwise, we're going to get that slight grainy texture, that slight feel in the mouth of the uncooked tapioca, which sometimes you'll experience in some of the coconut yogurt brands. Okay, so we don't want to go too much further than that. Let's turn the heat off. And then immediately we'll stir in, off the heat, let's stir in those sweeteners and the vanilla. And I did happen to hear that a custard is not a custard unless it looks yellow. So if that was the case, you could also put 1/4 teaspoon of turmeric into this, but it's not quite the same yellow as, I guess, a traditional egg-based custard. So just as a bit of a heads up, and I'll show you what I mean here with the one that I've already made. So we want to get all that in there. That's why this spoon is such a good tool. Look at that, no waste. Love it. How's everyone going? No questions? Everyone's so quiet tonight. I feel like you mustn't be making it along with me. Hello, Karen. Just watching from your caravan. Wonderful. Wish I was cooking it because I would love to eat that right now. Going to be delicious and definitely going to make it. Awesome, Karen. I'm very happy to hear that. And I'm happy that you can still take part, kind of, from your caravan at Mooloolaba camping. That's cool. Okay, so there's our custard. That's the texture that we want. I'll show you here as I pour it out. That's what we're after. And then as that cools, it is going to get quite firm. So what we're going to do after is reblend it. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So let's get all that out. This step is pretty important because sometimes that agar-agar powder tends to form kind of that layer down the bottom. So we do want to scrape out the bottom of the pot. There we go. Okay, coconut custard. So that now can cool for a couple of minutes so it's not steaming in your fridge, but otherwise straight into the fridge. And then this will be set by tomorrow or in a couple of hours, quite a few hours actually, just to be fully cooled in the fridge. Okay, so I'm just going to set it aside. Then I get to show you how to put it all together when it's done. So fast forward 24 hours. Let's say you've come back and you're ready to put it all together. This step can also be done the day before you serve it. So a trifle is actually quite nice if it's had a chance to sit and soak and marinate overnight, if you will. So it's actually a really great dessert. Maybe that's why it was popular at Christmas, is because you didn't have to make it on the day fresh. All right, so here we go. I'm going to bring this forward here so I can see your questions. And because I didn't have too fancy trifle dishes, I did this one in a bowl. So hopefully you can see that. So I've done the mango around it and the blueberries in between. Okay. And yeah, I can totally turn it because the jelly's set. So that's what we're after. Okay, so I think it's a kind of a nice effect. Rather than having an opaque jelly that you can't see through, I think that's kind of a nice effect. So that's how the base goes. And we do, in this case, want to get rid of that extra moisture that's in there. All right, now you have a couple of options. The way I've described it in the recipe is that we would add the liqueur on top of this layer. But if you like your sponge cake in the trifle to be a little bit softer, a little bit more moist, I'd probably add it on top of the first layer of cake. Okay, so I want to show you how that's going to look. So our finished cake that's nice and cool, here we have it. So I did this one in a springform pan. Okay. So because that's cool, it should come off for us. Yes, beautiful. And then we want a bread knife so that we can cut through the middle of it into 2 layers. This takes a little bit of effort to kind of make sure that you get your knife level. So get down there and check it out. And before you make too much of a cut, really make sure that one end is not going up or down, because that can happen pretty easily. And then we just want to cut through, trying to keep it as even as you can through the cake. Okay. So you might need to do a little bit of lifting or a little bit of pressing depending on how you go. There we go. Okay, and I'm not going to disturb them yet because I want to put them on in the same order so I don't get them spun around and they aren't level, which is not the end of the world. But okay, so I'm just going to take that one off straight on the same direction. I'm going to put this one in, put this cake down. Hopefully it's going to match that diameter and sit straight on top of the jelly. Might be a bit big. If that's the case, if you've got a big gap there, you're just going to need to trim slightly around the edges. So I do have a bit of a gap there. So let's just do a light little trim around the edges. Darn, it just means somebody gets to have a little taste of the crust before we get into it. There we go. Steph, I've never cooked using an egg substitute. Gave up baking when I found out my youngest was allergic to eggs. Plus we went sugar-free vegan. Any tips for starting out with egg replacements? Well, that's why I went to all this effort to make this cake, Steph, is exactly because I don't want to use egg replacements. So if you mean like egg replacer, those are I'm not a fan of the ingredients that they use in those, but if you mean things like flax eggs and chia eggs, that's all great, except when it comes to making a fluffy white cake. So that's why we've had to go to the efforts of doing the aquafaba meringue, as you'll see in this recipe. So yeah, so as far as starting out with egg replacements, that's why this recipe took so long to develop, is because eggs are amazing in their function, but this way we can achieve it. So it's a combination of everything. It's a combination of the flax that I've used in the recipe. It's a combination of the apples. It's also the aquafaba stabilized. So every single part of that recipe, believe me, I've tried every variation, and this one's definitely worked the best. So I hope that answers your question. If not, let me know. Okay, there's our bottom layer. Let's add a bit of that fancy liqueur on top. And I need to thank Karen for this one, for donating your apricot liqueur to the cause. I'll leave it up to you how much you want to add. The softer the cake you want and the more fun of a night you want to have, obviously the more you're going to add. We're going to need about 1/4 cup, depending on, again, how big of a cake you've done, how big of a trifle. So I'm going to put that on top so that absorbs all the way through that cake. There we go. And then next up is our custard. Okay, so this is the yellow custard that I did yesterday. And as you'll see, it's quite firm. So it's kind of like a jelly in itself, right? So what we want to do to turn this back into custard, and this is perfectly what we want, okay? We're just going to reblend it because it's going to keep its shape, believe it or not. So I'm just going to get this ready to reblend. You can do it by hand, so you could just get in there with a whisk and mash it up, but I really want it smooth, and I'm going to be a little bit picky about that flavor. So just bear with me. I'm going to grab the extra jug. And I'm going to reblend that. I'm not going to lie, there are a fair few amount of dishes with this recipe, so hopefully everyone appreciates and knows that you went to a lot of effort for them this Christmas, but thankfully you get to do it the day before. So let's blend that up. Okay. And there we go. So we got kind of a smoother texture there. So we'll pour that on top. Now keep in mind that this recipe is designed for a bigger container than this. So this is actually not the full cake recipe, and I just needed to do this as a demo. So ideally, this recipe is designed for that full size trifle that will feed about 12 or maybe more. Okay, so I'm not maybe going to put the whole amount of this custard on here, but we do want a generous custard layer. Oh, I can't tell what I'm smelling, if it's the fruit, the custard, the liqueur. It smells incredible. And I don't know if you noticed, but I'm not actually going to cut the next layer, the edges around the next layer, because my bowl got bigger as it raised to the top here. So that's probably going to be perfect, that we had to trim the bottom layer, but not the top. That's the little goal. All right, so that's enough of that one. So last layer on top. Press it down so we don't get any air bubbles in there. And then we're on to decorating mode. Starting to look pretty nice. How does it look from your side? Very cool. Okay, so next up is the coconut yogurt and then our decorative fruit layer. And if you happen to have any toasted coconut shreds or maybe some dried rose petals or edible flowers, all of those make beautiful garnishes. All right, so whatever coconut yogurt you're using, let's give it a good little stir, little mix. And we'll spread that on top. Yeah. You do not have to go right to the edges. So if you want to preserve that look, hopefully your cream is nice and thick like this, and then we don't have to go right to the edges. Maybe give yourself a little bit of a bowl in the middle because we want to keep our fruit juices inside. Oh, yum. I'm so sorry that you don't get to eat yours straight away if you are cooking this, but it'll make it even better tomorrow. All right, and then our fruit. Now I do want a couple bits of nectarine on top because they're nice and colorful. So I'm just going to slice around those into 8s. So I'm going to make 4 cuts around the belly and into wedges of 8. And then just twist the knife to get them to come off of the stem or off of the pit. Interesting. I feel a little bit spoiled having grown up in stone fruit country and apple country and wine country in Canada. I can't help but find myself being a little bit, what's the word? I don't know how my husband would describe that. Spoiled, precious, oh okay, precious when it comes to my stone fruit. It's just not quite the same here, but they do a pretty good job. But that being said, mangoes, I didn't like mangoes in Canada because they probably traveled for about 3 weeks and they were stringy and not very gross. So definitely, if you've only ever had a mango in Canada, you've never had a mango. Just saying. All right, so there's our little bit of fruit on top. Again, you can take as much or as little time here as you like to make it a design of your choosing. I'm sticking with the flower theme. Okay, and I'll put a wedge of that in between. And I'll save some room in the middle for a little pile of blueberries. Why not? There we go. Okay, maybe a little round edge of mango. And nice frozen blueberries on top. Now I'm just having fun. It looks a little bit too perfect, so maybe you want to sprinkle it everywhere else. Or maybe just you want to do a row around the edges. But I promise I will end this here soon, and I want to put a little layer of the sprinkled toasted coconut flakes as well, because I think that looks delicious and amazing. And not only that, the longer you salivate over something, the better it tastes, and the better you will digest it. So I'm happy to make you wait. How are we going? Chris, instead of the coconut yogurt, is there anything I could use, just not yogurt? Well, you could do a cashew cream. So you could make sure, like, it's better if you've got a really powerful blender, but you could do a cashew cream, Chris, and make sure it's quite thick. So leave it as thick as you can possibly get it in your machine, and that would be delicious as well. Yeah, good question. Steph, thank you. Work of art. Yes. Bonus points. All right, and last but not least, I think a nice little sprinkle of some toasted coconut flakes in honor of the tropicalness of this dessert would be yummy. And I'm going to call that good. So I don't really want to break into it to show you how it goes. Maybe I should let you decide how you want to destroy it to serve it. And I'm sure it's going to disappear pretty quickly. But there you have it, guys. A whole food, dairy-free, gluten-free, full of love trifle that's hopefully the healthiest one you've ever had, but also the best one you've ever had. So I would love to hear how you've gone, how it's all come together, and to see your work of art, because every creation is going to be different and all just hopefully equally as beautiful. I kind of want to cut into it and serve it, but I'm not going to. I'm going to leave it, and I'll let you guys just, I guess, do your own version of that. So thank you so much for being on Cook With Me, for watching and or for making. And please do share with me in future, whenever you get to that, what your creation looks like. I want to hear if you're having it on Christmas Day. Thanks, guys. See you next time on Cook With Me Live.